Welcome, everyone, to the Be Freaking Awesome podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Sammy Kennison, here with our co-host, Angela Belford. And today we are joined by a very special guest and podcast host herself, Madison Hoagland.
Hello.
Madison, why don't you start off, tell us a little bit about your podcast that you host as well?
Yes, of course. So, I have a podcast with my former college roommate, Brooke. So it's called Dare to Share, Dare number two, Share. And so we created this podcast so that our listeners would have a place where they can share their stories, their secrets, and to just like vent to us about anything and everything. And so we have like silly prompts, and then we also have like some somewhat serious prompts that allow our listeners to like get things off of their chest that maybe they're like dealing with, or secrets that they've held for a really long time that they just want to tell somebody, but they don't want anyone to know their identity.
I am super excited to have you because, as you know, in the next 2 weeks, my book is publishing, and it's so much about getting to know yourself. And I think that there's a lot of our negative beliefs that are rooted in this idea of if anybody knew the real story about me, then they would not like me, they would not accept me, they would not love me, all of those things. And so I think that's why it's super intriguing, your podcast, because then it's like this beginning point of people being able to like, oh, I shared it with one person and I didn't die, so their nervous system is not freaking out. Although I can imagine if I had told you my story and then all of a sudden I heard it on the podcast, it would be like, oh. But then it's so curious to me too, because what if you tell my story and like 7 people think it's about them? You know, that happened in my book. A couple of people were like, oh, you were talking about me, weren't you? And I was like, nope, I wasn't. Because I think there's some of our stories are very universal. So super excited to have you here.
Definitely. Yeah, it's really interesting because like we always try to not really put too much of our opinions on the story into it either. It's more of like affirming them and like, I've also been there. Like, I've struggled with this, I've struggled with that. And like, sometimes there are secrets that are shared that I'm like, oh, that's really horrible. Like, we hate that that happened. And like, we also pick and choose some of the stories that are said, because sometimes we're like, that's probably not something that we should share. Like, maybe that person just really needed to just get it off of their chest and put it into that prompt that we like, that Google form, and maybe they just wanted someone to listen and to kind of like read it but not really respond to it. So we kind of like really try and read them prior to see like, oh, should we read this or not? And sometimes we're like, you know what, I bet this person just really needed just to get it off of their chest, and maybe we're not going to read that out loud because it might be something that's a little bit too personal.
That's very cool.
I know that I have shared some stories for your podcast, and
Yes, you
I have
have
shared some stories that I have told many people. It's not stories that I only share anonymously. It's stories that I would like, I'll tell you anytime, whoever you are. I won't share here because I know Angela does not like a good poop story, so I'll keep it to myself. But anyway, there's also, I was like, you also have some listeners like me that are like, nah, I just got a funny story. It's not even anything that I need to get off my chest. It's just like, it's a interesting time. I would not say fun time all the times, but
yes, you participated in our first ever episode. One of your stories was in there, so
and
I'm not going to say which one, but I know which one it is.
I remember telling you the story in advance. You're like, wow, okay, you are not even anonymous with that. That's a lot.
Nope.
Okay.
It was so good.
Oh man. So for me, within my life, like I have not really been somebody who's had a lot of shame. We've talked about this on the podcast before, that there are things that I'm like, I don't think about what other people think about me that often. And Angela's like, Sammy, that's not that common, actually. Like, you're just living life. Who cares what anybody thinks about me is less than, may not necessarily be the norm. And so for me, sometimes the concept is hard to think about, that there are some things that people actually don't want to share with others, because I have so few things in my life that I am like want to keep to myself. So anyway, so it's just been an interesting thing of shifting and like expanding my grace for others who actually do have things that they don't want to share with others.
I just want to remind people, in case you're not a regular listener of the podcast, that is not something that is bred into her. I do not get to take any credit whatsoever. That it's like you could, because I could imagine somebody being like, oh, your mom's a public speaker and she affirmed you so you don't have shame. No, that is not, like, God wired her up like this. Like, she came out not caring what anybody thought. And I can tell you that because we give examples from like kindergarten, first grade. And I had to definitely read books about the strong-willed child because she didn't even always care what I thought about things. So anyway, I just want the disclaimer. This is not my parenting. This is literally just her personality. And what a blessing it is. But Madison,
it actually is a blessing.
It is a blessing.
I wanted to make sure that wasn't a sarcastic.
Oh, I was not sarcastic. That was not sarcastic. It is a blessing. 1000%. Sorry if I just don't want anybody to think I'm taking credit for that one because I get no credit because it actually caused me much chagrin. I would be like, oh my gosh, our famous story is she gets off of the school bus in, kindergarten, and I had been up nursing through the night. And so her dad had gotten her ready for school. She gets off the school bus and I'm like, oh my gosh, did you wear that to school? 5 says, Mom, of course I wore this to school. I just got off the school bus.
I have a 4-year-old now and I can see that being said from like a 5-year-old kid. Like, yeah, that is the kind of way that they talk. I'm raising another one.
Super duh. But anyway, so what are some things that have been surprising that people have shared? Give us some maybe like you thought you were giving a prompt that wasn't super hard. And I'm so curious.
Like some people will use full names of people that in the stories. And so we have to change those, but I've never known the person that has been in the story, which is just really funny. Some of the stories that I've read, I'm like, I actually know that situation and I can kind of like piece together whose story it was. And I'll ask them, I'm like, did you submit to my podcast? And they're like, yes. And I was like, was this your story? They're like, it was. How did you know? And I was like, because you've told me before and I figured it out. But there are like we had a prompt that was like in 5 years. And like it was in 5 years, where do you see yourself? Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And so Brooke and I kind of shared like what we thought and like what we like where we see ourselves. And we were like, obviously our podcast will take off and like all of this stuff. And like, but then like some people were like, I honestly have no idea where I'm going to be in 5 years. Like I might not even be here in 5 years. And like very serious things where like we're just like there to be an encouragement as like, you know what, in 5 years you might not know where you'll be, but just know that like God is leading you in 5 years to have something planned for your life. Like he's always in control of that. And then actually, so one of my favorite episodes, which I did this one by myself, it was advice for your younger self. And that one got really, really, really deep. And I actually cried a lot at the very end. And I was like, I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm just like bawling as I'm like talking on the thing like this. And that one, like just some people were just sharing like some really deep, like, feelings about like family members who weren't here anymore that they wish that they had spent more time with as younger selves and things like that. And then this is so ridiculous and so funny, but someone in our secrets you've never shared. So we did one that was something that no one really knows about you, stuff like those types of prompts. And my favorite like entry of all time of any of our episodes was this person. They were like, our wedding was actually our 1-year anniversary party and nobody else knew. They had gotten married a year prior and no one else knew about it and invited everyone to their 1-year party. And so that was like the best entry. We were both just like, oh my gosh, because both of us were like, what if we were at that wedding? Like, what if we were at that wedding and we didn't know that? Like, could that have been one of our friends? Like, it's super fun. So yeah.
That's really interesting because I've actually heard that story in reverse. Meaning that
Yes.
like someone got engaged and then got married and over time added a year to their how long they'd been married.
Gotcha.
And or subtract it. How did that work? Anyway, where it basically was like it made it look like they were married when they got pregnant. And so that they looked better for
I
everybody.
gotcha.
And the only way it came out was a family member saying, "Oh, it's time to celebrate the 25th anniversary." No. And there was confusion over when the 25th anniversary was, and it was anyway, so and it was like, how could you love me for 19 years? Oh my gosh, or 20 years or whatever. And it's like, yikes. So
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting because I heard that story from the child who was the one who had been born. And there was a part of it where he was really struggling. He was like, golly, this changes so much. This is so different. And sometimes, like, what does it change? I don't know. We put there's this judgment and this shame of like, because they got pregnant before they were married, somehow everything is different. Maybe because it's been shared before that my birthday is 5 months after my parents' anniversary. So if we do some math, you can kind of see how that adds up. And maybe because I'm a child who my parents got pregnant before they were married, got engaged, then got pregnant, then got married. It changes. And so there's sometimes where these secrets that we keep, what's the worst that's going to happen if someone knows? And I think that sometimes in our head, we really inflate that and it becomes this big, giant, scary thing that something bad is going to happen if everybody knows this thing about me. And maybe not.
well,
maybe it's no big deal.
I want to affirm their fear that it is not irrational because there are plenty of stories of people who have been found out they were pregnant and then they were kicked out of their family's house. They were, so there are, and if you hear those stories and then you're afraid it was you, like there's just, I think in our society, especially in certain subcultures that we all are parts of, there are some places where it is very, very shameful. I'm not saying that's right or good. I'm just saying that like, it's understandable. It makes sense to me that they would be nervous. Now, I agree with you. Like, how does that change the identity of the child?
Right. That's the part that I think that I don't fully understand.
Well, and I know somebody that found out that they were actually a product of a long-term affair. And the story they had always been told is that we wanted you, we tried for you, we miscarried a couple of times, and it did not reconcile with their parents weren't together. They were together. So one of the parents was also married. And it was like, I remember having to like talk through this and be like, but it can be true that you were wanted and that your mother loved you and that she did miscarry and she was deeply in love with this person. And that doesn't mean that there wasn't a different marital status than you were aware of, but it was like so hard for them to reconcile because it was just like, then everything they told me is a lie. And it's like, no, because it's still true. She loved you. It's still true. And be that as it may. So I think it's sometimes the identity piece of it comes up when you believe it changes that whether or not you're loved, whether or not you belong. Maybe I'm sensitive to this because I was adopted and sometimes people don't know that they're adopted. Anyway, so I just want to say,
I thought you might say that you were sensitive to this because this ties into your book that's coming out here in 2 weeks about, that's where I thought you were going with that. I was like, oh, look at you. I was ready to be like, look at you making another marketing plug. And then you're like, because I was adopted. I was like, oh gosh, never mind. We're not teasing her about that. That's not what I meant. But I do think this ties into your book.
Well, but yes, because this secret is the crap in your head. Hey,
Right.
there we go. There's the
There you go. There we tied it in. But I think that there's so much about ourselves and our stories and the things that we make it mean something that it doesn't have to mean. And that right there, like if we can figure out how to unlock that, I feel like it was just such a basic sentence and there's so much depth that could go to that. But when we make our stories mean something different about ourselves, that's whenever we can get hijacked and be in a place full of shame and this is something that's too much to share versus this is just a part of my story and that's okay.
Yeah, I'm curious, Madison, if you've ever read stories, like you said that you read some and that they would be like, and you were like, wow, that was really hard. Have you read some that you read it and somebody the way they were telling it was clear that this was horrible to them and you were thinking, I don't think less of you. I don't think it's not that you would discount them and their feelings, but just that you would be like, honey, come on out into the light. Because no, we're not going to judge you. Do you know what I mean? Do you see stories like that where you feel the shame coming out and you're like, there's grace, there's love.
Yes.
Invite you into the light.
Yes. And we always, even when we do read those stories and like we choose not to read them on the podcast necessarily, we both of us will talk about it. We're like, wow, someone just needed to get that out. Really, like it was, and sometimes they're little things, and I'm like, oh, I've struggled with that. I've talked about it though. Like I've put it out there in the open. I remember because like I used to not be someone who would share everything. I remember being in junior high and high school, and I would not share about the things that I was struggling with, like very serious things. When my parents were getting divorced, like none of my friends, their parents were getting divorced. I was the only one in my friend group who was going through that, but I didn't share that with anybody. Like had maybe my two best friends that I shared that with, and years later did people that I was friends with in high school find out that I was going through that, and they were like, we had no idea. And I was like, I just didn't want to share it because I thought you might look at my family differently. And because family, I was in high school, I was a senior, I was older like when this happened. And so I used to not want to share. And as I got into college and realized that when other people were sharing, I was like, wait, I also struggled with that. What? Like there's someone else out there that is struggling with the same thing as me. And then one of my roommate, my podcast partner, Brooke, we had a really great conversation one time where we just started sharing some things that we were struggling with in our relationships. And we were like, what? Like you're also going through that? And we were like, wait, what? And like it was just this big realization of, okay, it's not that big. And if I'm sharing with other people, like maybe that will help them who were maybe like me in junior high and high school come out of their shell and kind of share more. And I there's this women's ministry that I have attended, like women's weekends, and one of the things at the women's weekend is taking off your backpack and lightening your load. But also like you have a shadow. And what is your shadow that's around you? Getting out of your shadow and like sharing what's going on. And like at the beginning of the weekend, because I've gone as a participant and I have staffed, when I was a staff, we all shared our shadow and what we were struggling with that week and just like getting it out there and like realizing that probably there are at least one or two other women who also share the same shadow as you, and you can walk out of it together. And so it's just one of those things where I have learned to just share everything. Like I am an open book. Like the other day at work, I was talking about so many things. Like someone else in our group was going through something with their family, and I was like, me too. I was like, I've gone through that. I shared my story, and they were like, wow, like I didn't even know that we shared similar stories. And I was like, yep, like we just need to all like get it out there, and like it'll help one another, and like you can share these things and other people are probably going through the same thing as you.
If you were maybe going to give some advice to your past self and or people who are currently in the situation that you were in your past, what advice would you give to just to sort of change that perspective from,
Mhm.
I have to keep all of this to myself and it's okay to share. Because I think
Mhm.
it is for your past self, but it is also for the person listening right now that says, no, no one can know these things about me.
Yeah. Um, I remember being in high school, and there was one person who had shared something at a camp that I was at. And I like she openly, boldly shared it. And I was like, whoa, taken back by that. And I went up to her immediately after, and I was like, this is what me too, I'm struggling with that too. And she just affirmed me in that and was like, you're not alone. So if you find that one person, like just one person where you know you can trust them wholeheartedly and that you know they're not going to shame you or feel like you're not going to be a burden to them, then you can share those things to them, and at least you're just getting it off of your chest and just like having it out in the open to one person. Because I remember I shared it with her, and then I was like, wow, I was accepted with love and grace and open arms. Maybe someone else will do that to me too. And so after that, I got more comfortable with sharing what I had gone through and what I had struggled with. And it was just a chain reaction after that. And it just took that one time and that one person who did share for me to be able to open up after that.
I feel like I want to play devil's advocate for a moment and see,
Hmm.
have you ever had a situation where somebody shared and it didn't go well?
Yeah, like shared to me or me shared to them.
Either one.
Either.
Either one.
Mhm.
I personally have never experienced it where someone did not embrace me with grace and love, and I think it's because I was very intentional about who I shared things with. Um, but I have, I guess, like if body language and facial expressions count, I have shared in groups some things, and someone was like taken back by it. But then they kind of like were able to like I was able to explain and unpack and work through it. But if facial expressions count and body language, then yes, I have had that like, wait a second, what? Like you what? Like that kind of thing. So yeah.
So I, in this story with the friend at camp who just openly and
Hmm.
boldly shared, that would probably be me in the story. I would be that person
Hmm.
who just didn't ever really care and just boldly shared. Because of that, I have experienced a fair number of times where people don't receive it well.
Mm.
And because I have this benefit apparently of not caring really what other people think, it didn't like deeply impact me, but I am able to like
Hmm.
notice and be aware of that. And I think that there are times where I have experienced sharing part of myself, and then it's like this person does not hold precious the gift of knowing me. Sometimes that feels like I'm tooting my own horn, but I also mean it. Like there are sometimes where people will be like, maybe it's used against me, or they'll be mean, or they'll bring it up and kind of throw it back at me. And for me, that's learning. And as much as I am willing to share and be open, I am aware of people who make it clear that they're not a safe person to share with.
Hmm.
And if you make it clear you're not a safe person to share with, like I am much more guarded. And I
Hmm.
am I'll tell the funny party version of the
Hmm.
story, not the we're at a coffee shop, like we're on like a coffee date sharing
Hmm.
big, heartfelt conversations. And so I don't know what the advice is for it other than like sometimes people do it, but I really think that it says
Hmm.
more about them than it does about me. Like my other
Exactly.
people's reaction to my life story actually isn't about me. It says a lot
Hmm.
more about them.
I think
Hmm.
that the use it against you, I can remember having to tell somebody I lost a coat at a conference and then I misplaced something else. And I had to say to them, if you say to me, you would lose your head if it weren't attached, I'm just going to warn you in advance, I will go psychotic. And they were like, what? And I'm like, I'm super sensitive to that. I'm not as much anymore healed from that, but I was undiagnosed ADD as a kid. And so one
Hmm.
of the hallmarks of that is that you lose things and you can't remember where you put things. And and so I was very, very, very sensitive to that. And you could tell that whenever I would annoy them, they wanted to like, well, if you weren't so forgetful or, that sort of thing. So I think that sometimes, and if you've experienced that, then you probably, if you don't have the, I don't care what anybody thinks, it can be nerve-wracking to then share who you are, because, well, what if they then, if I'm having a rough day, and less about like what I struggle with, but more about like, especially things that I'm like, no, I used to it used to bother me that I was not very good at email, and that I get overwhelmed very easily with email and not getting back to people and things like that. And so then if somebody uses that against me, then I would think it would make you over time, it can be harder and harder to then share if you have had some.
That feels sort of like when we, if we have buttons that people can push that they don't realize. And so for an example of this that just really relevant in my life season is that like I have a lot of friends who really struggle with thinking that they're a good mom. And I'm really grateful that for all of the things that I feel like I'm not enough about, being a mom has not been one of those things. I actually feel very confident and secure in my ability as a mom. So this past Sunday, when Henry looked at me, he saw I was wearing my cool mom necklace and he goes, cool mom necklace, but you're not a cool mom. You're a bad mom. You're a bad mom. Duh. And then he walked out of the room dancing to Billie Eilish song in his head. There was a part of that like my son looked me in the eyes and said, you're a bad mom. And I was like, what a weird kid that I have, and walked away. Like, it did not rock me because that is not a button I have. And there are other people who I know that like, if their child looked at them and said, you're a bad mom, like crushed, like that would be so detrimental. And it's really like, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense that would be the reaction. Sometimes I think sharing the things that are sensitive, it does give people around us the opportunity to not, or to be aware and to be more sensitive. And yes, somebody may not be kind and gentle with that. A lot of people are, and the people who we want to be in relationship with are going to be gentle and kind. Sometimes they need reminding. Sometimes they need to be like, hey, remember, this is a sensitive thing for me.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was something I was really insecure about. And then maybe my husband made a joke about it. That would not be a great thing. My 4-year-old, I don't know. There's not a whole lot you can do about the 4-year-olds making jokes about things. They're just, we've already talked about 5-year-olds on this podcast. So anyway,
you're not getting your self-esteem needs met from your 4-year-old. What?
Right.
Wise.
Right.
That's super funny.
So Angela, I know Madison's here for us to interview her, and I want to take a moment and throw it over to Angela. As we are prepping for this journey of traveling lighter, what are your thoughts about just how you share yourself with others, how you share yourself with yourself, and kind of what can you do? How can we, I don't know, embark on this journey in this way?
Dang, I wish we would prep so that you would know where my sensitive buttons were today. Oh my goodness. I had to there's a part of my book, it's in the relationship chapter, and it says, if all else fails, re-parent yourself. And because some of the time I try all of the techniques of emotional processing, and I feel my feelings and all those things. The example I use in my book is like, I just would be like, I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry. And I would just be whining in my head. And sometimes I have to, like, in an adult parent voice, be like, fine, you're hungry. Get over it. Okay. And so I had to reread that section today because literally first waking thought, which, that moment when you're just barely conscious, so you're not choosing your thoughts, very waking thought was, why can't you get your crap together? And then kind of follow-up thoughts of like, well, you have set yourself up to sound like you got your crap together. So, yeah, a little bit hard 2 weeks out from the book launch to be admitting that. And also, I regularly say the reason why I'm an awesome coach for this is because I am on the journey myself. And there were just so many plans that I had for like, this is how I'm going to do the book launch. And I didn't follow them, and then the plans got waylaid by technical difficulties, um and then I had a hard time getting, I think in my mind I wanted to get back on track to the place where I had originally planned. I thought like I just took a detour and could be back on the track, but it feels like I'm now back on the track, like farther down. I think I can today resonate with the idea of like, I understand why sometimes people don't want to share, because it feels slightly terrifying. It feels like there's an element of this where it's like, no, 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 you're publishing a book that says you can free yourself from the crap in your head, and you still have crap in your head, which I say in the book that I still have crap in my head, right? Like I have much more freedom. And so I would say that where we are going is I have had to say, okay, everybody on that listens to me knows that my faith is very important to me. And I have a deep, deep, deep belief that God is sovereign and things work out the way they're supposed to. And if you don't share that faith, then you can just be like, the universe brings you what you need. So however you want to say that in your head. And I just had to reconcile that maybe this is the way it's supposed to go. You know, now Byron Katie, there's a book that I love called Loving What Is. And I say to people all the time, well, this is exactly how it's supposed to go. You know how I know? Because that's how it's going. And, but when you have all these plans and you've been organized and you've wanted to do things a certain way, and then it doesn't go the way that you think it's going to go, then it is just hard to keep that perspective of like, this is the way it was supposed to go. I also, when I did get conscious thought and opened up my email, then I had a really sweet endorsement that was, the guy's like, I'm so sorry, this is 2 weeks late, but hopefully you can still use it. And I want my wife is now reading this book so we can talk about it together. So I know the book is helping people. I know that it is already making an impact, which was my whole goal with doing this. I would suspect that Madison is probably also doing her podcast to make an impact. And so I don't know, did that answer your question? That was a very long answer to thanks for sitting with me, you two, while I didn't even put a lot of makeup on today because I was like, you're just gonna wreck it by crying anyway. So let's just preemptively keep your eyes from burning with a bunch of makeup on. So anyway, I don't know if that, hopefully that gives people hope that even on the journey, even as, second book in, as much work as I've done, it's still, things go awry and things don't go the way you planned. And it's still sometimes can be hard to kind of get control of those, I say that was my first conscious thought. That was the third time I woke up, because I also woke up at like 1:30 and 4:30. And that's when I know I'm not like settled in. So thanks for listening.
Of course.
Yeah.
Angela, I always happy to sit with you. Always happy to take the phone calls, and we've joked, we've passed the baton back and forth of who's talking who off a ledge. And so always happy to be here for you while you process those things. And in some ways, I don't know that you specifically answered the question about how people can start their journey, I think, but I appreciate the example for you of somebody who's on the journey and where it's at and the encouragement. When it comes to just knowing yourself and sharing with others, what would be a good first step to being able to share your things and share, even get to know yourself some more?
I think that sounds like we could all follow Madison's podcast and start submitting our stories anonymously.
Yep.
That's a really entertaining thing that I've never thought about as a way. I think a lot of times I do talk about the idea of like, starting with your preferences. For you young people, I love Runaway Bride. It's an old movie, apparently, with Julia Roberts, who doesn't know how she likes her eggs. And so she literally one day makes eggs in all the different ways and then tries them all. And so I think that there's some elements of like, what are some ways that you are like, I don't even know what I want? Figure out what you don't want. If you, I say in the book, like, go out and look in your, the vegetable garden that is your life. And are you happy with the fruit that's coming out or the vegetables that are coming out? Always mixing up some metaphors there, but are the results that you're getting worthwhile? If you are feeling lonely, like I can't even tell you how many people tell me I feel so lonely. And then when you ask them to kind of share their story, oh no, I can't. And I'm like, can you see how that contributes to continuing to feel lonely when you don't yet share? And so I know we've done episodes here on how to make friends and how to be friends, but I would say the first step is to just do an assessment of what parts of your life do you love? Which parts of your life don't you love? In Be Freaking Awesome, I actually had there's an assessment for the Wheel of Life where you can literally assess your life in about 10 different areas. So I think there's some tangible tools like that of how to get started.
I also feel like it sounds like the Dare to Share podcast prompts are some fairly good questions, even if it's too much to share on the podcast. Like, I mean, Madison, asking people, where do you see your life in 5 years? What would you tell your past self? What is your favorite camp story? What's your favorite wedding story? Like, even those kinds of things, evaluate who you are and your life, and the stories that you have. Start to collect. I don't know, our lives in some ways feel like they're just made up of a bunch of stories. Collect them, notice them.
Because anyone, like, they don't have to submit a story. Like, they could it really is just like a reminder to like remind yourself, oh, I have a lot of stories. Like, my life is a story. Like, I have all of these things. And like, if you want to share it, awesome. You can share your first kiss story. You can share some fun, like, sleepover stories, like those types of things. But then there's also those more serious of like, what are some secrets that you've never shared with anyone? What's some like advice you'd give your younger self? What, like, we did a lot of advice ones for a little bit. We were really on the advice columns for a minute, where it was like advice for, because Brooke was moving to South Dakota. She had never lived anywhere but her home, and advice for leaving home, for leaving the place that you grew up. Brooke, when we first started this podcast, actually, like our first meeting together, Brooke told me that she was pregnant, and she did not want to be pregnant at the time. It was definitely an accident. They had only been married for 3 months, and they wanted to wait until they were almost 30 to have their first child. And so we did some advice for pregnancy and motherhood, and we had a lot of submissions of, hey, like, Brooke, I'm in the same boat as you. Like, I feel what you're feeling. And it like made Brooke feel affirmed in that as well. And so, like, sometimes our prompts are for us and they're for us to hear, like, okay, we're not alone in how we're feeling. And like, almost every single time I'm like, oh, I have a similar story to that. Or, wow, there's someone else who's going through the same thing as me. And just fun things like that too. So like, obviously there are going to be some really fun ones that we do, fun prompts that are kind of just like light and airy and fun, but then we have those serious ones to really get down to the nitty gritty of, like, yes, you have a story, and like sharing it will be really awesome and helpful for other people too.
Where do we find those Dare to Share prompts?
You can find them on our Instagram. So we always post in our stories It's the @Dare to Share podcast. So Dare #2 Share podcast. And so we post on our story, and we have like a link in our bio, and we keep all of our prompts in there. We usually release our prompts for like 3 or 4 days, and we keep reposting them so that people can submit. And then we also put them on our personal Instagram stories as well, so that we can get a little bit more engagement with that. So we can have some other people who might not be listening to the podcast that want to submit their stories too. And we always invite DMs as well. So sometimes someone will submit a prompt and we're like, we have to know who this is. Like, who is this? Let us know. Like, DM us. Let us know if this is you. And most of the time, people will answer and be like, "Yep, that was me." And like, it's so fun, and everything. But obviously, they don't have to. It is anonymous most of the time. But that's where we post our prompts, is on Instagram.
Awesome.
And if you wanted to see the past prompts, all you have to do is scroll through the episode list, and on probably same places you can find this podcast, Apple, Spotify, the huge,
The huge, yep.
I love it. If we were to, I want all three of us to answer this question. If you were to leave somebody with like one piece of advice, go from here and do this one thing, what would that one thing be?
I would say reflect, look at your life, see that there are, like, you have so many stories that you might not even know of, but all of those stories make up your full life story and your testimony. And so reflect, write some things down. I like to journal sometimes, and I'll just write things that popped into my head that day, of like, oh, like this reminded me of this. This reminded me of this. Oh, that smell. Oh my gosh, that smelled like my grandma's laundry room. That reminded me of this great memory. Like, just random things. And then I'll also write something that I'm working through right now, in counseling, is defining my emotions. And so how does that story make me feel? Like, what is the emotion that I'm attaching to that story? And so I'm really going through a season of reflection and learning, and unlearning things. And so I'm really in that season of reflection. And so that's what I would say. Like, from here, just like sit down, like grab pen and paper, and just reflect on different stories in your life. And some of those might be really awesome, and some of them might not be so awesome, but define, like, how is this making me feeling right now? Like, where can I go from here? And how can this story help somebody else?
Love it.
Angela?
Oh,
I
one
said
thing.
all three of us.
I know. I thought you were gonna ask. One thing I would say is be gentle with yourself, and just continue to develop self-compassion. And whenever you hear yourself speaking in an unkind voice, then ask yourself, would you talk like that to your best friend, to your 4-year-old grandson, to your niece or nephew? And if you wouldn't, then stop talking to yourself like that. So yeah, self-compassion. Oh, and buy the book.
I think for me, my piece of advice, which is definitely like feels sometimes like a next level, like you want to do advanced, go first. Be the person who enters the arena first, and tries to be that person to share with others. So it probably won't go as bad as you think it will. And who knows, maybe on the other side of going first is some greatness.
I love that.
Thank you, everybody, for being with us today and for listening in. If you have not yet pre-ordered Traveling Light, go do it. Go do it now. You can go to angelabelfer.com to find the links. You can go to Amazon, go pre-order. One of the things that Angela found out this week is that we actually have no idea how many pre-orders we have. We aren't able to see it. And so this is exciting time where we just get to sit in anticipation for the surprise party that will be how many pre-orders are there. So don't let it be a boring surprise party at the end of August. Go pre-order it. Just kidding. Love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, we hope you guys go be freaking awesome.